My story began when I was 16 years old. I was just kind of a normal nerdy kid and enjoying my little group of friends, but I started having these weird things pop up in me. I started having arthritis, which is not typical for that age, but it would move around in my body. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I thought maybe it was from playing volleyball, but I really sat benched for volleyball, so it wasn't a good explanation. At the same time, I also started getting these rashes. I got a rash all across my face, which we now know is called a butterfly rash. You see that in lupus. And my energy levels were plummeting and really couldn't figure out what was happening. And I started getting these migraines that would last for days. I used to call them lost days, where I would just vomit from the pain for days at a time. And one day, after being at the pool all day with my friend, I came home and I had this migraine and I was throwing up. And when I stopped throwing up, this rash was just so dark on my face. My dad looked at me and said, I think the skin is a window to your health. And so I think we should go to the doctor. Now, I didn't take that seriously because my dad has something I call dad science. Like, he just says stuff and he thinks it's science because he made it up. And so I was like, okay, Dad, window to the, sure. Which I now teach that is true, actually. Dad science did score 1 for dad science. But we went to the hospital and it turned out that I was severely ill. And I was diagnosed with something called lupus. And lupus is an autoimmune disease. And lupus is the most serious of the autoimmune diseases. It had attacked my kidneys. And I was in stage 4 kidney failure. We had to do a kidney biopsy right away. And they said, this is really bad news. And with the severity of your disease, we don't have a lot of hope that the medicines we normally use are going to save your kidneys. And if we don't do something very severe, like not just the usual steroids, you might not make it past 6 months. The best we can hope for is dialysis. And worst case, you're not going to make it. For me, I think I was mostly just stunned. I didn't, it's kind of hard to process at any age, but at 16, I was more worried about the cute guy in my bio class and, life and death issues. What the doctors decided at the time was there was an experimental therapy using chemotherapy. It turns out it works, but they weren't sure how long to do it for. I did chemo for 2 years straight. For 16 to 18 years old, I had chemotherapy. And my family always kept me focused on my purpose in life, and that lupus was just something I was dealing with. And so I was able to graduate in the top 10 in my class in high school. I got scholarship to my first choice college at Carnegie Mellon and had my last chemotherapy a week before I started college. So it was like college was the best thing that ever happened, because like chemo was over and I was a freaking college student and I was going to get to, and my lupus had gone into remission. So it was like rebirth. It's autoimmune disease. You have to be really careful. You have to, no sunlight, always get enough sleep, avoid stress, all that good stuff. The problem with medical school though is they don't really care about if you have an illness or a disability or, you have to work the same hours as everyone else. I was working at one point 100 hours a week as a med student, and my body just couldn't handle it. And so I got sick again in medical school, and I ended up having something called a mini stroke. I had to start taking injections every day in my stomach. So I would, for blood thinners, and that was supposed to be for life. And, I was so heartbroken because I'd been in remission. And so I was like, oh, maybe this is behind me. I'd still get a rash sometimes if I went in the sun or feel some arthritis. But I was like, maybe the worst is over. Mm-hmm. And when that happened, it kind of reminded me that the clock was ticking, because, with lupus, people don't live a long life, because it's constantly progressing. And even the medications can't really stop it. It just treats you, holds you. And so, when I realized that, without the medicines, I'm going to have a stroke. And with the medicines, I might have a bleed that could take me out. I get into a car accident and hit my head. Now I have a bleeding stroke instead. So it was, and it also was the final nail in the coffin on never having children. People with lupus often die in childbirth and pregnancy. But when you have blood clots, pregnancy, you already raise your risk for blood clots. So that was just, a no. So I was just finishing up my last rotation, and that's when I met Thomas Tadlock, my husband that you mentioned. He was just, the most incredible human being I've ever met. We fell in love really, really fast. And within a month, he was talking about marriage, which was awesome. But I also then had to bring up the whole idea of this illness, because I didn't really tell him about the lupus thing yet. You don't meet a really hot guy and start with the lupus story. And I had to lay it out to him that I'm not going to live to a very old age. I can never have children. and you're going to end up taking care of me before I die. I'm going to become handicapped from the joints and everything else. And I said, so I understand if this isn't, the future you were looking for. And he just paused for a moment, and he just said, I'd rather have a short life with you than a lifetime with anybody else. I wanted to do Thomas's program so I could look hot for my wedding. This was how I healed lupus. Vanity. He knew how to raise metabolism by feeding the body right. And everyone else I knew who lost weight for their wedding, they did it by starving themselves. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't going to do that. I didn't want to hurt my body. So I told him, I want to do your program, but his nutrition program, it was tons and tons of raw vegetables. It was tons of water. It was omega-3 fatty acids, but it also had meat. And I'm not doing the meat. Yeah, cheers with the green smoothie. And so he had to change it for me and make it into a vegetarian program. He also knew that things like dairy products will make you fatter. They are the best at making you fat. So I had to give up my cheese addiction. And so I ended up accidentally on a 100% plant-based diet, a vegan diet, but a hyper-nourishing one. 4 months later, we were getting ready to go to our wedding, and I had my blood tests drawn, and they were all negative for lupus. They thought they were someone else's. They retested them, and they were still negative. And they continued to be negative for the past 11 years. But after 4 years of being ridiculously healthy, I was super fit, I was super healthy, I decided I wanted to have children. And when I had my first son, and had a healthy pregnancy and delivered him and was still healthy. I had to have a C-section because he was breech, and had surgery, and the doctors were all waiting around the bed like something's going to happen. And I just got up and said, when's lunch? And they're like, what? So that was when we realized that there was I didn't really have lupus anymore.